at the Village School is literacy specialist, so I am in the library every week with the kids and then also working with teachers on curriculum and instruction and the things that are happening in the classroom. So I'm at both places. So I have a good 12 years in education. A lot of my focus has been in early childhood from pre-K threes up until first grade and in the second, and then a tad in fourth grade. But those younger learners are kind of my sweet spot, and it relates well to what we're going to be talking about today. So over the past year and a half, I have been continuing my studies looking into reading, and that is what is bringing us here together for the science of reading. So you may or may not have heard that term before, but I want you to take a look at this little comic strip and kind of get a appreciation for the humor. Hopefully everybody can see it okay. Yes? Okay. So potentially a lot of us have been in this boat before where you are sitting down with a book with your little one and we are trying to decide what the word is. Is it little, leap, lake, laugh, and by the middle, mom just finally tells her what the word is. And then by the time she comes back to that word again on the next page, she has lost it. So a good comic is funny because it's true. So I have experienced this before too, and I've worked with other parents and teachers and families that are like, yeah. So we're going to kind of look at why this is happening and where we go from there. So what we're going to talk about today as we break down our topics into smaller pieces, the definition of the science of reading. What does it mean? Why is everybody talking about it? Why is it important? The research behind it, because there has been a ton of brain research and looking at how readers learn how to read. So how did we get to these conclusions and what studies are done and how were they evaluated? The methods, how reading is taught, how it has been taught in the past, how things have changed here and there, what are we doing now, and what are we going to be doing moving forward. So the methods that go into teaching someone to read will go into what does that look like at school, and then how you can support at home. So if I have an acronym in here of SOR, Science of Reading, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start with defining what is the science of reading. What are we even talking about? So to start with, what the science of reading is not, okay? It's not an ideology or a philosophy or something that people are just doing right now. It definitely is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It does not involve a political agenda, and it's not a curriculum or a program of instruction, nor a specific component of, I'm sorry, that was supposed to be curriculum there. So it's a way of thinking and looking at the science of how the brain learns to read. It's not these things here. It's not just a little something. So we break it down into a definition. The science of reading refers to two related concepts: the study of how the brain learns to read and the methods for teaching reading that high-quality scientific studies have been shown to be effective. So up until, kind of recently, we're making all kinds of observations, and I'm going to say recently, and we're going to revisit that in a second. People are making observations about what are children doing when they're reading. But the brain's research that has been going on is going to take a closer look at that and see what that really means when we're learning how to read. So to understand the research, we want to know a little bit more about it, because moving forward, the science of reading is referring back to this research that we're talking about. So I titled this To Be Certain, Be Skeptical. So research is happening all the time on everything. So some research analysis might have some inconsistencies. You might read one research that tells you, coffee is really great for you because it can reduce heart disease. And then another study that might turn around and tell you, you shouldn't drink any coffee because it makes you jitterish and makes you can't confuse, so a diminished concentration. I remember back when should I be eating eggs or not? Are they good for you or are they bad for you? Okay, so sometimes inconsistencies on things. A confirmation bias. You definitely need to be aware of that because sometimes you might be wanting to listen to research or talking with people that agree with you. Because when you have somebody that's like-minded, yes, it's easy to talk about that. So then if you are just biased against what the people that you agree with and then choose to ignore what you don't like or what you don't agree with, you can see how there's going to be inconsistencies of what's going on. So the methods and then who's behind the research. How is the actual research taking place? Are we talking about, I'm doing a survey on and asking 10 people a specific question, or am I talking to and researching hundreds and thousands? And then has it been repeated or proven? And is there times that things have been disproven? Sometimes research can be motivated by, who's behind it, especially if money might be involved or, we mentioned the political agenda a minute ago. So looking at all these things, we have to have trust in what we're talking about in this science. So when we are referring to the brain research and the studies that are going into the reading of science, many or most all of these have actually been around to 30 or even 40 years. So a lot of this research that we're looking at is not necessarily brand new, okay? So back when all of this was starting 30, 40 years ago, research after research, large scale, small scale, putting that all together, as the studies were coming out, of course, there's a big flurry of everybody trying to prove it or disprove it, okay? And then eventually it was proven and reproven and confirmed over and over again that the studies kind of settled down a little bit. So I put an example here about hand washing, thinking about the research, the proof that went into why you wash your hands, And once it's been proven and reproven that for clean health, killing bacteria, viruses, to wash your hands, you don't necessarily need to keep researching that over and over and over again. The science of reading, there's a lot of meta-analysis going on, taking all of those bodies of research, a large body of research, and then looking at them by doing a study of the studies, basically, and then combining them, looking at statistics, and seeing what they're all saying. So as technology has improved, so has the research. It started out maybe as just going into a classroom, talking to the children, how did you figure out that word, to following up with brain scan maybe is not the right word, but looking at what's happening in the brain as kiddos are reading. So can we trust it? Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Okay. This is titled The Simple View of Reading. Okay. It makes it sound simple, but it's not necessarily all that simple. This is a multiplication type equation, looking at decoding words by your language comprehension is going to total or equal your reading comprehension. We're going to get into a little more detail on the next slide about this one, but decoding words is just being able to look at a word, figure out what that word is, look at the letters, sound it out. Language comprehension is going to be almost like your oral understanding of the words that are being said. What do they mean? How do they all fit together? And when you have those things, when you're reading, you're going to get reading comprehension. So if you have a friend that can look at the letters H-O-P, and they can decode that word, put it together, and understand it's the word hop, but maybe they've never played hopscotch before, and maybe they're missing this piece here. They don't have an understanding of that, and they're not going to know what the reading is about. Okay, there is a link here that goes into a little bit more. It's from Reading Rockets, where she talks about the simple view of reading, that if you go back and you can take a peek at it, it is in there. So that was the simple part of it. But to break it down even more, Oops, maybe. There we go. This is the same basic model, but broken up into the individualized pieces. So a second ago, we had the decoding or word recognition multiplied by the language comprehension to equal skilled reading or reading comprehension, okay? And it breaks it down. Decoding, phonological awareness, being aware of sounds and how they're put together into words, being able to hear the first sound of a word, to hear the ending sound of the word, the sounds in the middle, rhyming words, just being able to understand that words are made up of sounds. And then sight recognition, when you can see a word and look at it instantly. For a lot of kids, new readers, even their name is a sight word to them. They can look at a word and know it instantly. So this is the decoding or the word recognition that we saw on that other screen. Language comprehension, a breakdown of that, okay? Vocabulary knowledge, understanding the words that are out there. Not just very simplistic words, but larger words that have more meaning or different shades of meaning. Background knowledge. I like to call that world knowledge. Kind of like I mentioned a second ago about hopscotch. If you're reading a book and the child is playing hopscotch in it, but the reader has never played or seen hopscotch before, they're not going to know what hopscotch is. So background knowledge or knowledge just about the world, which entails like everything. Language structure. How are sentences put together? Where does the adjective fit into the sentence? Does it come before or after the noun that it's describing? And literacy knowledge, understanding how to handle a book, that when we're reading, it's from the left-hand side to the top, going down. So book knowledge and verbal reasoning, problem solving, being able to make inferences or referencing back to something that you just read to figure out what's happening now. That's your language comprehension. So both of these are happening, and when they come together, they're all wrapped up in this nice little package of skilled reading or reading comprehension. So what does all that look like inside the actual reading brain? Let's see. Okay. So when we're reading, we have a 4-part processing model. Okay? We're actually starting down here. Oops. Give you a little. So when we are decoding, the first step in the simple reading, they're looking at the letters that are in the word. Okay? So B-O-W in this one, or the combination. And then as we're looking at the letters, we're figuring out, well, what sounds go with it. Okay? So if you have the letters B-O-W, this represents the sounds that they make. So could it be B, O, ow? This is what's going on in the brain. So once we have that, we have to figure out what's the meaning of this word. Is it bow? Is it bow? Kind of makes sense. And then as that's happening, our little brain is starting to think, okay, bow, like, we're tying a little knot with a bow in it, or are we bowing to someone at the end of a performance? And that's going to come into the context of what you're reading about, okay? So I put another example down here. If a student is reading or someone's reading and you come up to the word match, M-A-T-C-H, okay? So we have to know what those letters are and then what sounds they would make. Ch. Okay, so now we've got kind of the decoding part down, but we have to figure out what that means. Your brain is starting to think, is it a match? Is it like a tennis match? Is it like salt and pepper where two things match together? Or is it you're actually matching and it's the same type thing, like with socks? Okay, and then by the time you put that all together, maybe your sentence is play hard and we will win the match. And then you're thinking, oh, okay, so it's this kind of match, like we're playing tennis. So all of that is happening in our brain while we're reading. So that actual reading brain, getting an understanding of how it's working, can help us understand how this all applies to the science of reading. So our brains are actually born and designed for oral language. So when somebody is born, they've got listening and speaking already pre-programmed in there. It looks different for an infant than it does for a toddler, but if you start thinking about the progression that they go, your little ones are definitely recognizing your voice, and then picking up on the sounds that you're making. They know the difference between mom's voice, dad's voice, grandpa's voice, the dog, those kind of things. So our brain is not actually wired for reading. Our brain is wired for oral language. So in order to read, a new network's got to be developed to teach our brains to read. So we're actually creating new neural pathways in there to reprogram what we're up to. So research into how the brain does this has become the foundation of the science of reading. And so this is going to in turn impact what we're doing at school and what we can do at home here. There's a couple links there also. If you're interested in the brain research side of it, a book, and then a YouTube explanation from this same author that's down here. So if we're designed for oral language, one, we're going to use that to our best advantages, but then we have to understand how to create those neural pathways. Okay. Here's your brain. Okay, the parts of the brain that allow us to process sounds, or the phonological processing, and then recognizing pictures or images, they're already there. Okay, so we start off by listening and hearing all kinds of sounds around the world, voices and all of that. That's there, and then being able to see things. And those images are already in there, okay? One thing that I think is interesting about your orthographic processor is our brain knows that if we have one of these chairs here, it's a chair. If I went over and knocked that chair down, it's still a chair. If I stack them all up, they're still chairs, okay? So our brains can understand that. If you're playing with your dog, whether he's sleeping or running around or jumping on the bed, you know the picture of the dog, it's always going to be a dog. So it's not the same for letters, though. Okay, so that's part of what's going to happen next in your brain as we try to create those new neural pathways. So think about like the letter B, D, P. It's changing. It's not still just a chair. It's now different letters. So this is the part we have to take what we're talking about and put it together in our brain in a new way to teach it to read. Okay, so I have here the phonological assembly part. It's not intact at birth. So this is the part of the brain that allows us to connect those speech sounds with the visual images that like letters that you're going to use for reading. Okay, we're creating this. We're using the parts of the brain that are in there, but we're recreating some new neural pathways. We're doing this with something called orthographic mapping. All that means is our mental process that we use to permanently store words for immediate retrieval in order to become fluent readers. Getting those words programmed into our brains. And even though we're programming words, we start off with the oral language in our brain first. So even as you're reading, your brain is still transferring it back to sounds, and that's how your brain is going to process it. Okay? So this orthographic mental process, we're taking what we know about the word, what we're already pre-programmed for, the pronunciation, the sound, the phonological part of it, and then combining it with the meaning, what we already know about the word. Have we run into it before? Is it an action that you've actually done it before? Okay, and then combining it with something new about the word, which is often that sequence of letters that we're running into. Okay, when you see it in a book or when you're reading it. So taking what we already know, what we're pre-programmed for, the sound and then the world knowledge of it, putting it now with the letters, and every time that we work to do that, a word that is going to be stored in your long-term memory now becomes a sight word. Okay. Any questions about any of this so far? Okay, all right, good. So again, your words are anchored in memory by connecting pronunciations to written spellings. That's how we're going to get those neural pathways going. That means every time that we run into a word, we're going to use the sounds, the spelling, and the meaning, and those three things are going to keep working together to get it implanted or in your brain, okay? And one thing that's important to remember that we have to be doing all of this, the sounds, the spelling, and understanding the meaning to create that pathway. With the spelling, one thing that's important to remember is the spelling of the entire word. We're really not learning words in whole chunks. If we learned it in a whole chunk to start with, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between house and horse. We have to look at the whole thing, and that's how it's going to get mapped into your brain. So thinking about that. It's a lot of work, but the kindest thing you can do for a beginning and struggling readers is to give them the time and encouragement they need to grunt and groan their way through sounding out words, because you're rewiring their brains, and it's hard work. We can't just skip past this. In order to map it into our brains, we have to do the work, okay? So this brings us to the methods part of how reading is being taught. Our end goal is always going to be that reading comprehension, however we do it. So I'm going to go through a couple methods. Phonics base. This one is going to go through a series of spelling rules. It teaches the child to apply phonetics, how those letter combinations sound out loud, and decoding words based on their spellings. So phonetic attempts to break written language down into small and simple components. Okay, purely phonics-based teaching is working really hard to identify letters, sounds, and do that decoding part. Sometimes in the past, on a purely phonics-based approach, we might be missing that oral language, the oral comprehension part of it, okay? And then that's going to bring us to this next one, another way that reading has been taught, called whole language or balanced literacy. I'm going to get this one a little bit more time because this one it's prevalent out there right now, so or has been. So whole language or balanced literacy is a method of teaching where children read by recognizing words as whole pieces of language, not broken down. Again, kind of referring back to the house versus horse. We're just looking at the whole thing and moving on because we're using the language as an entire system to kind of make meaning with words and functioning in relation to each other in context. So if you were reading in whole language and you ran into a sentence that said, the boy was riding a horse, and there's a picture of a little boy riding a horse, it looks pretty good. But if you look at what's there, it actually says the boy is riding a pony. So the child would probably get the gist of what they just read, and it matches with the picture, so it makes sense, but it's not actually what was there. Whole language or balanced literacy involves a balance between a teacher-led reading and writing instruction and then independent learning time. And it focuses on letters combined with context or imagery to teach beginning literacy skills, okay? So what does it look like in a classroom? It gives students the opportunity to read, and then it will just come naturally. Kind of that get all the feels going in there and create this lovely environment, and they're going to pick it up naturally. Students are taught to look at a variety of cues. They're often labeled as MSV, meaning, okay, if I'm going to read this word, does it make sense? The structure, what kind of word belongs here? She is, and maybe we're stuck on a word. Is it a verb that's going to go there? Is it going to be a noun? And then also taking a look at the visual part of it. Does the word look right? There's been a variety of reading strategies, and then leveled text that we're going to look at in just a second here to dive a little deeper into that. So some of the reading strategies that are sometimes taught with this whole language approach, they're often with these cute little animals to make it easy to remember. Well, look at the picture. Look at the picture and see if that tells you what the word is. Flippy dolphin. A short sound or a long vowel sound. Just try it and see. Skippy frog. Just skip right over that word. Trying lion. Just try a word. Does it make sense? There's some of these that are out there like that. Now, if you think back to what we were just talking about, that brain research, is this making sense, though? That if we're teaching them to read and we need to get that orthographic mapping imprinted into their brain, but we want to just tell them to skip over the word, that's probably not going to be happening like we need it to. Okay, so yeah, I have, here he goes.
Okay, Camila,
this is an example of that.
This book is called Toys. Okay, I want you to do your best reading today. Go ahead and start. Let's keep the book on the table. Here is a car. Here is a ball. Here is a truck. Here is a box. Here is a boat. Here is a plane. Here is a train. Happy birthday. Great job. Can you turn to your favorite page?
We're going to let her turn. They do go on to talk a little bit about the book. The next thing that she does down the road with her little one here is gives her the words. Kind of like flashcards, like the word boat, train, those words that she just ran into in that book. Guesses if she was able to read those words or not? No. Okay. So right away, how did this little one start with this book?
She didn't know the word.
Right. And so cute though. She was like, I don't know it. And so her mom is an educator and gave her the first bits of that sentence. And then she went on to use those bits time after time. And she's good at it, but she's a little bit sneaky because when she turns that page, she's glancing at the picture. And all she needs to do is, there is a, see what the picture is, boat. There is a, see what the picture is, car. So you could question whether or not she's reading. She definitely's got the pattern memorized. She's pointing. She did really great with her one-to-one correspondence and used the picture clue to figure out that word, but probably didn't read any of them because when she goes on, she's not able to read those words. So they do a little bit about, what was your favorite part, and okay, so take a look at this word. What letter does it start with? What sound? She continues on. So this pattern, you could call this a patterned text because she's just learning the pattern that is in the book and not necessarily decoding any of those words or figuring them out. So the orthographic mapping is probably not happening here with this example, okay? Any questions about any of this? Any thoughts or ahas? Okay. So, oops.
Okay, Camila, we are going to read this.
We love Camila. We would love to see her again. Let me try and see if we can get out of this. If it's going to let me. Technical errors, just to keep me on my toes. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to talk about another approach called structured literacy. It uses explicit and systematic teaching. Like there is a plan, there is a scope and sequence. These are the skills that we're working on first. When we have them, we're going on to the next one, and they do bleed into each other. But it's very systematic and explicit. It's this is the sound that we're working on today. This is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like in your mouth. This might be different words. Where did you hear the sound at the beginning of this word? Or do you hear the sound in this word? And it's very intentional teaching. It focuses on phonological awareness, word recognition, phonics, decoding, spelling, and syntax, or how words work together in a sentence or in a paragraph and the way you're speaking and stuff. So emphasizes oral language abilities that are essential to literacy development. Those are speaking and listening skills also, being able to verbalize thoughts, and promotes development of world knowledge to create understandings. If you are, again, reading about something that you're just not familiar with, you can read all the words you want, but you may not connect it as easily if you don't have your world knowledge, and that's like where a lot of your nonfiction reading can really come into play in here. So a structured literacy works to create those neural pathways involved in reading throughout instructional experiences. So your structured literacy is going to be based on a lot of these science of reading, brain research that is happening and taking, and you can see from what we're talking about right here, how it is pulling in phonics a whole lot, and it's still working to develop reading comprehension and pulling things from what we've been doing in the past and complementing it with science to back it up. So I'm moving right from that one into what that is going to look like at school, because this is going to be our goal. When we take this information and start applying it, these are the things that it's going to look like. Okay? Phonemic awareness. Okay? Just the ability to hear those individual sounds in words by listening, identifying, and then manipulating those sounds orally. So this is going to be greatly emphasized in our lower grades because, remember, we're programmed for oral language. So that's when we're going to really get on it and hit it then. And we're going to use our Hegarty curriculum that I'm going to show you just in a second. But students in the intermediate grades or upper grades, might still benefit from practicing phonemic awareness. Because sometimes those foundational skills kind of just get skipped over. And if they've been taught to say, like, oh, if you don't know the word, look at the picture. Those older kids are not going to have all kinds of pictures in their book to help them with every word. So sometimes you might see some reading difficulties show up in the older grades in the elementary school, and this might actually be some of it. And so, of course, research is showing us that this is hugely important. So every day in our classroom in our younger grades, we're working on our phonemic awareness, and I'm just going to open up a page and then talk about one of them here. So this one is adding initial sounds. So the teacher would say, I, and the students might repeat it, and then say, okay, now add s to the beginning. Sigh, okay? Say E. Now add t to the beginning. T. Things like that. Some of the younger grades might do starting off with blending and say I might give them, or the teachers, cup, cake, put it together. What do you have? Cupcake. And it's just building all those skills to get this oral language going so that we can later on apply it to the reading. Okay? So phonemic awareness, just understanding and hearing those individual sounds and being able to manipulate them too. Okay? That's some of your higher knowledge there. So code emphasis. So we're really working on acquiring the skills to crack that code over alphabet and speech. because we do have 44 speech sounds in the English language, but yet we can spell them 150 different ways. So here's back to where we're talking about that instruction being explicit and systematic, going through that in order to help them figure that stuff out. So that this is going to look a little bit different in your younger grades than your older grades. Your little ones are going to start, with the letters that you could use the word to spell the word stamp. Okay, because then we can start manipulating and understanding that. When you get up in the little bit older grades, say up into second grade, we might be talking about IGH, or we like to call them the bossy R's. When you get the AR or the IROR, where they all just say and talking about how those are things happening. So the kids must first learn how to decode our sound out words before they can understand the meaning of text. This goes back to that first step in your simple view, being able to decode. Okay, because there are, I even have some books on that kind of thing, uncovering the logic of English. Because believe it or not, there's tons and tons of rules in the English language that actually make a lot of sense. There is a little song and a rule that goes along. How do you know if you use a C or a K? So we're cracking the code. This is our goal. Your explicit and systematic phonics instruction. We've already referred to this a minute ago about that specific order or sequence of skills, the more simple to the more complex. And by the time you get into your intermediate grades, it's going to be more of a word study where you're looking at where did that word come, what is the base of it, is it have Greek or Latin roots, and getting into the midst of that, looking at the words a little bit more deeply. Okay, and then of course grammar is heavier as you get into the older grades too. Okay, this will also show up in Words Their Way. So our kiddos from first grade on do Words Their Way study, which matches up through this. And their Words Their Way is lined up to what they're currently working on. We'll talk about that in a little bit more right here when we get to the assessment portion of this. But small group instruction, because kids do not all grow at the same rate, on the same path. So, they are targeted what they need in their small group instruction. So whatever those kiddos need happens with the sometimes one-on-one, sometimes mostly with your small groups of a couple kiddos that are working on those same skill levels. And that goes with a good understanding of where they're working on in the scope and sequence or the continuum. There we go. Decodable readers. We've also been hearing a lot about decodable readers. Decodable readers are books or could be passages that only include words that students can decode or sound out according to the skills that they have already been taught. Now, this one technically says only includes, but a decodable reader will have a good 75 to 80% of the words in there that are put together and using skills that those kiddos have already been taught that they're reading it. Now, you'll have that extra 20-ish% that will have some high frequency words on that they would have also been taught. Okay, so it's just a matter of them giving practice with what they're learning. So on some of the other books, like maybe our little one was reading in the video we had a little while ago, a lot of times there'll be words in there that will match a picture. So we think that we're figuring out and reading it, but it's actually put together in a way where we might not have the phonics skills to understand it for your younger readers. So, okay, so decodable readers, just so you know, on this table and that one back over this way, there are examples of some decodable readers, okay? And most of them, they tell you at some point what phonics skill it is working on, and you're welcome to take a look at it and open it up. Like this is the Boatman, and it's working on IGH and then the long vowel pair of OA. Okay, and they go through the whole sequence of the letter and sound acquisition. There's some that are in the back are even getting closer to chapter book that would be appropriate for the kiddos that are older that maybe need a little bit more. So we have hard copies of it. The teachers have lots and lots of digital copies, especially for our younger parents. You might even see ones that come home that start off like this, where the pictures aren't in there. So that we are looking at the words, and we're pulling them apart and we're decoding in order to create that mapping that's going on. And then this is the activity that goes with it. It's still a whole full lesson where you match up the pictures and whatnot, because we don't ever want them, while we're trying to decode, we don't want them to take their eyes away from the word, from those letters. That's where we want them focused. So that's one way to do it. So you might see those. Decodable readers. Okay. Knowledge building and vocabulary. This is going to go back into your world knowledge and your understanding of what's happening, because reading comprehension is closely connected to the background knowledge that we have in a topic. And by understanding the vocabulary that's contained in a text. So a friend that just loves lizards and goes outside and collects them and tries to catch them, or puts out little food for the lizards, and then they go to the pet store, they want to see the lizards, and they're talking about lizards and all that good stuff. If they go to read a book about iguanas, that little person is going to have an advantage, because they've got some world knowledge, some background knowledge of what they're going to run into next. So you can imagine if any book all of a sudden is start talking about a salamander, that person that just loves lizards, already knows what a salamander is going to be able to make those connections. So kids will have access to complex text. For the younger grades, they might be read out loud by the teacher, and in the process gain more complex vocabulary. Okay, and this is this is early grades, but really your little people, even. Because oral language is built in. So talk and read and do things. Reading strategies. We looked at some other reading strategies a little while ago that actually took the focus off the words. We're going to try to get it back on the words with things like reiterating that we start on the left side of the word. We're going to stay focused on that word. We're going to hop to every letter and try to figure out that word is. We don't want them to take their their eyes off of the word. Once we're focused on that, we're going to stretch out each sound and try to blend that all back together in order to read that word, or sometimes it's an approximation to the word that we've got there. And then putting it together to read the sentence again, and then thinking about, does it make sense? Some of our older kiddos will be breaking down words into smaller parts if they're stuck on something, either breaking it into syllables, or if there's a base word that they can find in there with the prefix or the suffix, and then understanding what the word is that way. Okay? Any questions about it? This right here? When we're done, I have 2 examples of this kind of thing. They are the same thing. They're just 2 different representations of what we've got, what we're talking about right here. Lefty Larry starting at the left, and then the graphing grasshopper is going to hop from every graphing or every letter, and then blending it together, syllables, and this is just a different version of that same thing. Stretch it, blend it, check it, break it apart into smaller parts, or find the base word like jump in jumping. Okay, the teachers have access to both of these, so depending on your teacher, it's their preference. So you're welcome to, I made little bookmarks out of those if you're interested in one of them to take home. So assessments. So in order to go through this sequence, this continuum, we need to know where they're all at, where the kids are all at. Because in that classroom you have 18 little people and you're probably at 18 different places or somewhat. So during weekly lessons, that student progress is definitely going to be monitored by your teacher, because remember, they're working with them in small groups daily. So that one-on-one, we're reading this book. She's making notes. He's making notes about how are they doing with it? What are they getting stuck on? What do we need to target more? What did they just breeze through and we're ready to go out to the next one? So those in-classroom observations are super important because they're in the moment and they're happening continuously. We do a spelling survey that goes along with the Words Their Way program that starts in first grade, and it shows which phonics patterns that the kiddos are able to apply in their writing. So now a lot of what we're talking about is about reading, decoding, but encoding or putting it in writing is kind of the follow-up to all of that. So the Words Their Way assessment gets a close look at that, and they do that at least 3 times a year. We also utilize our MAP testing, also 3 times a year, plus progress monitoring that can go on in between all of that, where they're doing it on iPads and they're looking at, in what we're talking about today, reading comprehension and fluency, and then it's combined into a lexile range. So the students will not be assigned a level. So we're not going to only work on level D or level J. It's going to be a little bit of a switch to this lexile range. Okay, so MAP scores will share lexile range when it goes through that testing, and so the lexile will give a reader a range of text that would be a good fit for them. There's also a lexile range on a lot of books also, and the lexile is determining kind of, when you're looking at a reader, the capability of reading within this bit of difficulty. Okay, on the lower end is going to be a lower end of a student's lexile range. They're going to breeze through stuff and they're going to be able to understand every little thing. And as the range that they're given, as it goes up and the text gets a little bit more difficult, then it might slow down a little bit, but within their range, it just means it's pushing them a little bit more. So any questions about this or anything that I didn't mention? Mm-hmm.
And there are so many different types.
Exactly.
And it's very confusing for someone who is not an educator.
Well, it is confusing because there's a lot of it. And you just mentioned because you're not an educator, but it's confusing to a lot because there's even some of these books out here, they're not leveled in the same way that we were talking about a minute ago with the leveled readers that followed the whole language bit, but probably the best thing I might suggest is we can find a conversion chart that would talk about those kind of things. And so if you had a book that had a lexile or had a DRA score versus a Fountas-Pinnell score versus a reading recovery score, like what does that even mean? And then you throw the grade level in there, and we all know that we can be little and in a certain grade level, but still be a higher reader. So it's kind of like finding good ways to manipulate all that together. I hate to say, but I don't feel like there's one simple answer to that.
It's really important to have that relationship with your child's teacher and use the same vocabulary. So they're going to be working out of a lexile model. Like they're going to be thinking about that. So when you're talking about what are some really good books or what should be my next approach, then you're talking about the same thing in terms of like lexile. Now you might say, oh, I found this, but it's a leveled reader, and then you can have that conversation about the conversion and what have you. And it's not an even conversion, it's an approximation of a conversion. And so, but at least as long as you're having that conversation using the same vocabulary and the same understanding of lexile, then you can have more of those complicated conversations when you're talking about leveled readers. But I would say for the sake here, you want to kind of stick more with lexile because it saves you that extra step of having to convert. Yeah.
True, but you mentioned you had a bunch already or something like that, right? Yeah. But don't worry about that. Yes. Yeah. Don't.
that, like Ms. Barker said, there are conversion scales out there, and so we can lead you to the ones that probably would be ones that we would use here and say, this is what we would be talking about. So if you said the level reader, we know we're working off of the same conversion scale, and again, kind of tightens up that uniformity in terms of how we're having that conversation. So
Yeah, because different publishers, they have their own levels. Yeah. Yeah. Which maybe this leads us to this. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. So this quote comes from an American author and civil rights activist that is kind of guiding everybody through the science of reading journey right now, because you might have seen, because we were just talking about leveled readers, seeing level readers coming home. So now that we know better, we're going to do better. It doesn't mean that we're going to throw it all out, but we're working our way into educating all of us, ourselves, our parents, our kids, and changing out our resources and our approach so that we can now do better. Okay. So with at home, I'm hoping that you take anything that we talked about today and start thinking about it as you're moving forward. Here's just some other ideas. Reading with your child. Okay, so they will have that spot, say, in their classroom, or if the books come home, will be practicing with those decodables that specifically match where they are in their phonics journey. That's one piece. And then the other piece of what you're reading is those books that you have at home, the books that they're interested, the books that come from the library, that maybe they're not ready to decode that information yet, but they've got the oral language and the understanding and the things that they're interested, that they can understand a lot more than your little people are able to decode at the moment. So read anything and everything that they love, okay? One little tip in here that I wrote, defining words as you go. Part of expanding their knowledge and their vocabulary is exposing them to words that they're not familiar with. So if you run into a word that they're not familiar with, you don't necessarily have to stop and have a whole conversation about it. You could just kind of slip it right in there. So I wrote down an example that I thought was kind of good. If you were reading along and this little character in the book and makes a giant mess, that mess is atrocious. It is so terrible. It is a giant mess. The mess was atrocious. And start kind of planting those seeds. And then the next time they run into that word atrocious, they've at least got something to get that mapping going on and getting their vocabulary. I mean, the mapping is a little bit different. Sorry about that, because getting their oral language and understanding their vocabulary going, it's different than mapping because we're not reading that at that point. But at least they'll have that part of it when they do run into it in words at a later time. So reading, definitely include nonfiction books. I love picture books. I still read them to all the big kids at this school. These kids love nonfiction. They love to learn also. So again, you're building on that background and world knowledge there. Do anything you can to create life experiences with them. We are kind of in this weird spot right now coming out of quarantine and COVID that, maybe that has happened as much as in the past or when you were little. And that helps them too when they're generating ideas for writing. Having some sort of something to pull from, and that could be just going on a walk and talking about the things that you run into or see along the sidewalk, or it doesn't have to. I'm not talking about a trip to a Grand Canyon, which would be awesome, but we're not doing that every weekend. But any life experiences you can do with your kiddo, talking about their oral language, their use of conversation, using big words to help develop their vocabulary. We talk some about with the kids here, especially when they're speaking or writing. We try to stay away from words that mean nothing and everything at the same time, like good, bad. It's kind of like, what does that really mean? So sneak in little words where you can think of it. Mischievous, hilarious, marvelous, atrocious, anything like that. And it could be that that your kiddo says something to you That joke was funny. And then you could read it back to them, but maybe switch it up and, talking about how hilarious it was, I was rolling on the floor laughing because it was hilarious, and kind of encourage them that way. Playing any games or with sounds or singing, some of the old classic like apples and bananas. I like to eat apples and bananas, and then you change the vowel sounds. I like to ate apples and bananas, things like that, just some little ideas. Or I'm going to the beach and bringing, I'm going to the beach and I'm bringing an apple. Next person, I'm going to the beach and I'm bringing an apple and a butterfly. And then keep building it like that. Any little games where they're playing with sounds, rhyming games. This one down here says nonsense words. Some of the activities that we play with them are like you get a frame of reference. Like, I'm going to give you some nonsense words. In your brain, I want you to be thinking about parts of your face. Give you something to kind of think about. And then say, I'm thinking about my schmoes. And they'll be like, it's not schmoes, it's nose. Or something like that. Some games where you're talking, you're manipulating sounds, things like that. Okay. I think we're about ready to kind of wind it up. If you are, anytime you have questions about anything I said, anything I didn't say, let me know. But if you are wanting to research more on your own, these are links. This will be shared with them? Okay. There is a whole series of podcasts out there by Emily Hanford. She's fantastic. She has some that are individual freestanding and some that will be our whole series, a whole series. So she would be one that I would highly recommend looking into. This is a link to reading material if you wanted to know more, just so you know. I have some examples here. But even with this link here, a lot of the books that are out there talking about this kind of thing are geared a little bit more to teachers. So just keep that in mind. But if you're a reader, that would be a good spot to look at. Reading Rockets is a website. I don't have that here, but we can add it. Reading Rockets is all kinds of information there on learning how to read. So that could be, if you're more of a web browser kind of person, that would be another spot that you could look at too. So you're more than welcome to get your hands on any of this stuff. But before you do that, any thoughts, ideas, questions?
So we can have the link when it's posted.
Good question. Yes. It will be shared. And because, yeah, a lot of this does have some built-in links in there.
And then for whatever
Yeah.
reason, if the links are not working, just let us know.
Yeah, we can get it to you directly. Yeah. All my links should be working. But if for some reason you just can't access if you have trouble accessing it for some reason, I can send you the presentation directly also. So, okay. Thank you. Yes. All right. Well, good.